I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week I'm speaking to Steve Knepper. I think I learned technically his family pronounces it Knepper in this country, which I would like to respect, but I would also like to put in my bid, especially since I think he speaks German, for reclaiming the silent K. Knepper. Knepper is a strong, there are few times when I am in favor of the Germans reclaiming anything. But in this case, I think the silent K, let's take it back. Come on, Knepper family, let's take back the K. Anyway, my guest this week is Steve Knepper, editor and founder of New Verse Review, and secretly the author of like an insane number of books. He's like the author or the editor or the co-editor of just a baffling number of books, articles, and other publications. I'm just going to promote one of them on this episode. He is the author, along with Ethan Stoneman and Robert Wiley, of An Introduction to Byung-Chul Han, who is the subject of our conversation today. We are talking about Byung-Chul Han's book, very short book, The Agony of Eros, which came out in 2017. We discuss it, argue about it. We also talk a lot about, he devotes the first section of the book to the Lars von Trier movie Melancholia. We talk about the birth of tragedy. We talk about the symposium. We talk a little bit about this is a first half, second half episode. And the second half it wasn't quite distinct enough for me to give it a separate title, but it is pretty different. The first half is much more about the Han book and about Eros as he understands it, which is not exactly how I understand it, or quite how Steve does himself. But then in the second half, we continue the conversation, but we also get into a lot of discussion of religion. Steve calls himself a serious bad Catholic, which I think is a great term, and here's my prediction. This week I'm putting out an episode, a conversation with Steve Knepper. The second half is more about religion than the first half. Next week I'm putting out an episode that Alice was kind enough to produce and edit, in which I talk with her about a T.S. Eliot essay in the first half, and then in the second half we talk about religion and demons and the podcast. My prediction is this. Of the two consecutive religion-focused Secret Show episodes, the Catholic listeners will love this one. They will love the first one with Steve, and they will be less fond of the second one that Alice and I did. But I thoroughly enjoyed both, and I hope that you do too. Just a prediction. Just putting down my marker. I had a really wonderful time talking with Steve. He is, for anyone who has not met him or corresponded with him, he is one of the most unassuming and unpretentious people you'll ever talk to, but he is dizzyingly well-read. I mean, he is extremely learned and yet has none of that patina of learnedness that can be so off-putting in an academic. He is an academic, but you'd never know it from talking to him, despite us having read fucking everything. So he's really a pleasure to talk to. He is actually an authority on Byung-Chul Han, and so I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed talking with him about it. And I enjoyed the bizarre rabbit holes we went down in the second half as well. A quick note, because I briefly mentioned my eventers again on this episode, and I refer to her as I don't know if I refer to her as a Christian poet or as someone who writes Christian poetry, but I did learn after recording this episode that's not. I believe she's a Christian, but she I think doesn't like to be categorized in that way, which is totally fair and reasonable, which I completely understand. So, and I think like why would she? Why would anyone want to be categorized in any way other than as a poet? So, Well, I mean, plenty of people who are not poets would like to be categorized as something else, but among poets, that seems totally reasonable. So apologies in advance again, Maya. Yeah, I think that's all I got. I think this is a really fun episode. It was not at all what I expected, but it was a total blast. And Steve. Here's another prediction. Of the episodes that do not have any Elijah on them, I think this might be my dad's future favorite. Like I think my dad, if your tastes have ever aligned with my dad's, I think you will really, really like this one. All right, here is Steve Knepper, author of, among other things, Introduction to Byung-Chul Han, along with Ethan Stoneman, Robert Wiley, and editor of New Verse Review, which is going to be coming out with their Halloween issue, I think, very soon. We are discussing Byung-Chul Han's book, The Agony of Eros. Definitely the first thought that crossed my mind was, hey, this German Marxist academic sure sounds Catholic. It's like and it turns out there's that's sort of, there's some truth to that. It's maybe not, maybe qualified a little bit, but he is sort of Catholic, and there also just seems like there's like a funny kind of horseshoe. There are like a couple different horseshoes happening in our current political spectrum, where like the new atheists have teamed up with the like hard right anti-Islamic, conservative Christians, and then like some of the like crunchy environmentalist Christians are now teaming up with the like, Cornell West affiliated Marxists. So, or like Slavoj Žižek is now into like atheist Christianity.
Yeah.
So yeah, this guy seems like maybe part of that, overall trend.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, I think that he's a little hard to pin down, and one of the things that's interesting is how much of that is savvy marketing on his part,
Sure.
right? It's like, I'll throw some Plato to the more kind of Christian or conservative wing of my audience. I'll throw some Bataille and some Badiou to the more critical theory left side.
Yeah.
Or I think that there's another way in which he's just kind of drawing on whatever thinkers allow him to go after the problem. Maybe that's a more sympathetic way to think about it. I don't know.
I think so. I mean, so I found him very insightful and extremely frustrating, but I think he is following his own original thought. I mean, down lots of other existing lines of thought. I was also surprised just looking at the whole first section of this book. It's called The Agony of Eros. This came out in 2017. This is part of the MIT as an Untimely Meditations series. And I can't remember what, but I have like 5 or 6 books from this series, and they're all kind of bizarre books. Similar to like I have a number of Verso Press books that are also tend to be kind of like weird shots in different directions. But so this book presents this argument about, he has a kind of a larger ongoing argument about what he calls the burnout society, and that comes up here. But this is a book that sort of focused specifically on the loss or the problem or the distortion or absence of Eros in our time, and how he understands that. The entire first section is about Lars von Trier's movie Melancholia. And I rewatched the whole first section of that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I love Lars von Trier. It wasn't until then, looking at some of the details today, that I saw von Trier as a converted Catholic, which it was shocking to me.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
It's hard to imagine how exactly that. This is the movie, by the way, that, and my heart kind of went out to him, because I think it was it felt to me like not problematic so much as just like deeply autistic. But this was the movie where he went to Cannes and he said into an open mic, like, "Oh, I did a lot of research into my family for this movie, and it turns out we were very sympathetic to the Nazis. And in fact, I am genetically, I suppose you could say, I am a Nazi." And Kirsten Dunst is sitting next to him, and just leaned over and said, "Please stop." And he was kicked out of Cannes for that. But the movie's fantastic. I think Han is 100% wrong about it. But I would, yeah, I want to let you jump in because this is your recommendation and it was a fascinating read.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it is even if I don't agree with you sometimes, I feel like you have a great bullshit detector. And you know, I like Han a lot. I wrote a book about him. I think he's
Yeah.
a really important thinker, but sometimes he triggers my bullshit detector a little bit. So I just wanted to see what you made of that. Um, I don't think this is his best book,
Okay.
but I think it resonates with some of the things that you all have been talking about recently on the show. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
Even the last episode, kind of strangely, which I don't think I would have thought about that, the one where you were talking about Midsummer and
Was
you know,
afraid. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So we'll probably get to some of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
that's right. Because Ethan has also talked about sort of his big he's become a real critic of Ari Aster and to some degree of Robert Eggers as well. But his argument is that their fatal flaws. They're anti-erotic, and I think the way he means that is very much the way Han means that.
yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I know Eggers' work a lot better, and I don't think I'm as critical of Eggers as Ethan is. But I think that what
And I think
Eggers,
he's a fan as well. But yeah, yeah,
yeah, he is. I mean, he's just super insightful about these things too.
yeah.
But my problem with Eggers is that I like what he does with sort of Jungian archetypal imagery and Jung stuff throughout, but I feel like he often gives you, especially at the end of the Lighthouse and at the end of Nosferatu, he gives you like a hard Jungian reading that you can take, which
Mhm.
having to do with the shadow and things like that.
Yeah.
That kind of sucks some of the mystery and the weirdness out of the movie. And I do think that that has a relation to what Han means by Eros, because the Eros is not just sort of for him, he differentiated from kind of desire for things you want to kind of gratify simple urges. And if for him, Eros is kind of this yearning outside of yourself for something, an other that can never be sort of fully grasped. And certainly, I think Eros, in that sense, can show up in all kinds of ways, not just in sort of romantic love where we tend to think about Eros. It can turn up in our relationship to artworks, but I think it has a weird role that it plays in the allure of horror movies too, the sense of the sublime, the sense of the uncanny, the sense of like what draws you deeper into this mystery. And I do think that Eggers, if I have a criticism of it, I think that he gives you an ending that could, if you choose to take it that way, puts too much of a bow on what's been a really weird movie. And I think
Yeah,
it would be
yeah.
better if he just left you in the weirdness or even amped up the weirdness more at the end.
Yeah, I have not seen The Lighthouse though. I've heard it's very good, and I actually even talking to Neil Campbell, the editor of Poetry London, he we're with I'm hoping to get him on, and he may want to talk about that a little bit. But yeah, Nosferatu, I thought the end, which is much the same as the end of the Murnau. In the Murnau, the sunlight makes the vampire disappear, evaporate into a puff of smoke. In Eggers, the vampire sort of has a horrible mass hemorrhage through his all of his orifices and falls dead. And it is sort of in the overhead shot is revealed as basically just a pile of bones. In both cases, the heroine keeps him past sunrise by kind of giving herself over to him. Down to, I mean, what was shocking to me watching the original is that it's a startlingly cynical moment when the husband has gone to kill the vampire and the wife basically lies to him and says, "Yes, I need you to go kill the vampire so you can save us all." And the only thing she's doing is getting him out of the house so she can invite the vampire. To me, Murnau's version is very folk legend, logic, moral, love, self-sacrifice conquers evil. I guess my read of the Eggers was that whole story comes from a book that Willem Dafoe reads, and he says, here's what happens. The maiden fair has to give herself over to death. I mean, first of all, we know that she's not a maiden; she's married. But second, he's revealed as being basically a tourist, a quack. Like there's even a speech where he's explicitly called out for like, you've studied this stuff, you know more about it than most people, but you still don't know. The only person who seems to have any firsthand knowledge is the 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 heroine and the vampire, and neither of them seem finally to have a really complete understanding. I mean, to me, what it really reminded me of was the end of the Brothers Grimm Sleeping Beauty, which is that the prince at the end of the Sleeping Beauty finally goes where, all the previous princes have gone into the thorns and have died in the briar, and finally when he goes, the briar opens up and he kisses her and she awakens. But the logic of the story has already told us that that's not because it's true love. It's because 100 years have passed and the timer's up. And so it's taken that he's sort of pure of heart and his love ended everything, but it's just that time was up. And what it made me think of was that interview with the lead singer of the National, where basically like the cure for depression is manage not to kill yourself long enough for the worst of it to pass for now. And to me, like that was the end of Nosferatu. It was like he's a plague. He's literally a plague. Like what happens at the end of plagues? They burn out.
Yeah.
Eventually. But nobody solves it. No, there's no cure. There's no heroic solution. So I mean, yeah, to me it was like what was fascinating about it was that in the other movies of his I've seen, the logic of the believing, like the mass of people, the culture you're observing, their beliefs are true, right? The Puritans' beliefs are true in the witch, the Norse beliefs are true in the Northman. In this one, it felt like nobody's beliefs are exactly like everybody has a theory, and they're all partial. And then there's just devastation and darkness and death and horror, and then eventually it's over because time has passed.
Yeah, I like that reading, and I definitely think the film allows for it. I worried that it also allowed for too much of a reading where you just read, you could almost allegorize it, and Nosferatu becomes kind of her dark side or her shadow that she's like embracing at the end, and it just allows you to kind of psychologize it too much. Not that I don't think she has a dark side, and not that I think there's some wisdom to that, but I like your point that if we just leave Nosferatu as this mystery, maybe even to himself, that's
doing all this demonology stuff that feels like, what does that actually correspond to? That's like, that guy was a demon freak in his life, and then he died and he's a demon freak corpse.
Yeah. Yeah, and even, the Count, right? The Count isn't the demon, right? He's just sort of animated.
A walking
animated the body. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's all of that I like about the film. I just do sometimes worry about he's really good with the archetypes. He's really good on sort of the psychology stuff. I worry that at times he allows you to, if you want to, just psychologize the thing and kind of allegorize it. Where I'm all about, I want there to be like weird shit out there. And I think that is part of Han's point too, right? He's like, Han's whole project is, it's very, very easy for us to get enclosed in our own little worlds, and digital technology facilitates that. And it's actually really good for business for us to be in that own little world space, because we're clicking, we're consuming, we're driving the whole machine, and no one's forcing us to do it. We've just been tricked into thinking this is what makes us happy. And of course, there's all kinds of levels of addictive by design stuff going on too. And he wouldn't design that, or he would not deny that. But Han's point is, what you need to do is you need to be drawn out of yourself. And that's where you can have the space for just a more decent life, right? I think that he thinks that one blind we're often caught in is that at least a lot of us in the developed world in the West, right? Not to deny all the real kind of exploitation and injustice that goes on out there. But a lot of us by historical standards have a really great standard of living, right? And all of these amenities, but yet people often feel pretty shitty. And he says that part of it is that, we no longer have this idea of what a good life looks like, or when enough is enough. And we have all of this world that just encourages us to go do more. You can always do more, right? You can, you got autoplay on your Netflix. You can always sort of endless scroll.
And I mean, capital itself has no ceiling. There's just moreness. It's like numbers. There's always more numbers. There's always a higher number you can go to.
exactly, right? So it's just like it becomes like a hamster wheel.
Yeah,
But since no one is kind of visibly forcing us to do this, it feels like it's free and
yeah,
we're
yeah, yeah,
exercising our freedom. So
yeah.
I think Han's idea of freedom is that, yeah, we don't want to have coercion, like legal coercion. That's a important part of freedom. But there's this second level that's kind of a blind spot for us, where we can actually end up making ourselves unfree by getting caught in this spiral of endless, aimless achievement and activity, right?
Yeah, oh,
Um,
absolutely. There's a passage I was just going to read a little bit because it reminded me of something Alice said when she was in New York. So he's talking about a culture of what he calls the achievement subject, the self that is sort of driven to do more, to make the most of it, to complete the project of the self. He says, "You can." As a slogan, as a pattern of thought, produces massive compulsion on which the achievement subject dashes him or herself to pieces. Because it appears as freedom, self generated compulsion is not recognized as such. You can exercises even greater constraint than you should. Auto compulsion proves more fatal than allo compulsion, meaning the compulsion of the self is more fatal than the compulsion of others, because there is no way to resist oneself. The neoliberal regime conceals its compulsive structure behind the seeming freedom of the single individual, who no longer understands him or herself as a subjugated subject, but as a project in the process of realizing itself. That is its ruse. Now, whoever fails is at fault and personally bears the guilt. No one else can be made responsible for failure, nor is there any possibility for pardon, relief, or atonement. He puts a lot of emphasis on the compulsion of you can, the compulsion of achievement, the compulsion of like, well, I could really be doing more, I could be maximizing, I could be monetizing, I could be being more productive, I could be self-improving. But I think maybe because he lives in Germany, and it reminded me like when I read an essay by Durst Grubine about like people don't even think poets deserve their weekly allowance, and you're like, what fucking country is this?
yeah,
But like it feels like what he's missing is the stick end, which is what, I remember when Alice went to New York, she said what she was so shocked by. She was like, "There's no floor. There's no bottom to how low you can go here. Like they will let you go all the way down." And in fact, I think a lot of leftists would argue like it's important that squalor and misery and the most brutal forms of homelessness and poverty be visible in order to be another catalyst, in order to keep driving people in that self compulsion.
yeah, I think that's exactly right. And to my mind, that's the central critique to make of Han. It's a really important one. In his breakout book, Burnout Society, he'll say things like, "We've left behind the world of the factory and the prison, and now it's the world of the all glass office building and the gym." Things like that. And it's like, well, yeah, over here in the United States, there's an
Yeah,
awful lot of prisons.
yeah,
And
yeah. The factories may be empty, but the prisons are full.
that's right. So, I mean, he oversells this move from what he calls the disciplinary society, which is that world of factories and prisons and
Mm-hmm.
people telling you what to do and enforced consequences and exploitation, to this world of what he calls the achievement society, where
Yeah.
it's all about you coulds rather than you must. And he overstates that, and it's obviously hybridized in all kinds of ways. And in later books, he starts to talk more about the hybridization, which is really interesting. A lot of businesses or colleges, they'll be like, take this class to improve your efficiency, right? Don't
Yeah,
you want to be a
yeah,
better
yeah.
person? But behind it, often there is like a consequence system if you don't take the offered road of here's how to be the best you, right? So
Oh
these things
yeah.
can really be hybridized in many, many different ways. And he's become a lot sharper on that, but he will still make these really kind of startling claims about the epoch that we've moved beyond,
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
are, I just think, wrong. And I think that like how much a savvy, nuanced reader will get out of Han is how much they're willing to read beyond that and say something like, "Oh yeah, but he's still onto something with this idea of self-exploitation, or this other threat to freedom that comes from our embraced compulsion to achieve or to do more and more and more, even if that's in the areas of leisure, like binge watching or something like that.
Yeah.
I think he's on to something important. And I think there is even, it's not just even though he tends to talk about it in terms of like a white collar, upper class kind of problem, there are all kinds of interesting, I think, working class issues that you can read more nuanced ways through his paradigm. I think about like Uber drivers or
Yeah.
anything in the service industry that relies on ratings.
Yeah.
In a way, in order to succeed, you've got to embrace the mentality that you are doing that you're getting your kicks out of getting those high ratings, high
Yeah.
rankings, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a strange way in which it also trades upon this willingness to embrace this achievement mentality while also being pretty coercive and often kind of dehumanizing at the same
Yeah.
time.
I think of like Jesus driving the money lenders out of the temple, money changers out of the temple. That there's a, I think like what's frustrating sometimes among leftists is that you're rewarded for any reflexive attribution of evil to capitalism, and to just saying, well, thanks capitalism, well, yet again, capitalism dehumanized, or if anything can be blamed on capitalism, and all forms of capitalism are bad. And I think conversely, what I find frustrating among a lot of conservatives is that any criticism of the existing hyper-capitalist, status quo is taken as an endorsement of Soviet communism.
Yeah.
And to me, it feels like free markets are like, they're like combustion engines. They're like incredibly powerful and really, really useful. But like, you don't want every fucking thing to run on a combustion engine. Or you don't want a combustion engine running in your bedroom. You don't want it running like in your baby's stroller. Like, you don't want everything to be. And it feels like that's sort of the problem now, is where like, oh, you could, when you're not using that car, you could rent it out. When you're not using that pool, that swimming pool, you could rent it out. You could rent out your, you could really, rent out that backpack you're carrying around. You could, and we can really, quantify and maximize and optimize your. He has a great passage where he talks about sexiness versus eroticism. He says, today love is being positivized into sexuality, and by the same token, subjected to a commandment to perform. Sex means achievement and performance, and sexiness represents capital to be increased. The body, with its display value, has become a commodity. At the same time, the other is being sexualized into an object for procuring arousal. When otherness is stripped from the other, one cannot love, one can only consume. To this extent, the other is no longer a person. Instead, he or she has been fragmented into sexual part objects. There is no such thing as a sexual personality. And it's like I feel the same revulsion when I hear like, manfluencers say things like, oh, well, she's hit the wall. Her value has plummeted. She has, same thing like my friend's a white guy who married a native Korean woman, and her family was very opposed to the match because he's white until she hit 30. And then they said like, oh, well, she has no value, so it's fine. He's just picking up, discardings at this point. And to me, like that's like, it's clearly like abhorrent to think of, people in these, setting aside the racism, it's like abhorrent to think of people in these sort of quantifiable ways and to say like, oh, well, somebody who's past this age has lost all value. But it feels not so dissimilar from the way I hear like a certain kind of triumphant feminism talking about, women getting rid of their dead weight husbands. I don't know. I find all of this really, really stomach churning. And he does, I think, make a really lovely argument about the being able not to be able, which I think probably sounds better in German, but part of the beauty of loving an other, of falling in love. Part of the beauty of Eros conventionally is that it's not just that it's blind in the sense that it's not, always wise, but that you love this other because that person is the other. And really any reason you can give is a little bit partial, right? It's not quite true. It's not that it's false. It's like you want your beloved to have lots of wonderful attributes, but it wouldn't really be an account of what's happening if you loved your beloved because of those attributes. My big argument, well, I want to let you jump in, but I have a big argument about just like the term he's using at the whole center of this. But yeah, yeah, part of what I really admired about this and what I really enjoyed is that as much as I disagreed with him, there is something often enervating and sort of static about a lot of Marxist criticism because it seems not to be attempting to discover anything. It seems merely to be, often in a very smart way, dismantling and deconstructing what is present in order to reveal what is always already understood to be the case. Whereas for him, he's a Marxist. He's got all sorts of, he loves Alain Badiou, who, like, based on this fucking forward, I fucking hate. And based on the thing based on what he cited of his, it was like the dumbest part of the book. But he loves it, he has his influences, but he seems to be seeking after something that is not wholly definable by any ism. And that I appreciate, even if I often disagree.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff in what you just said. First of all, I completely agree with you about the idea of markets, right?
Yeah.
Like markets are incredibly powerful. Markets pricing can go wrong, but the way markets handle pricing is a very, very difficult thing, impossible thing perhaps, to actually create in another way. They convey information that you can't get another way. But you don't want markets sort of commodifying everything, and you don't want markets sort of being set up a way that they channel, all the wealth into extreme inequalities, or there's
Yeah. Not every arena of life needs that to be the engine managing
exactly,
it.
right. In fact, that's incredibly corrosive, right? And I don't think Hahn is a Marxist, right? Even though he likes Badiou, I think that it's interesting. I think Badiou's forward is kind of fighting over what the significance of this book is. You know what I mean? I think he's trying to sort of pitch it as more of a political book than it is. Hahn seems pretty quietist up until recently.
Mm.
And whenever he intervenes in German politics, it seems like he's kind of I don't want to use the word generic, but a pretty mainstream kind of social democrat kind of guy.
Yeah.
Um, I
Those
think
those
that
social democrat, I guess, means something different there than democrat or even democratic socialist means here. I
yeah,
gather.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it would be on the left here, but not kind of certainly not a hard left, I would
Right.
say.
And politics doesn't seem to be the end for him.
No. And so, I mean, in our book, we wrestled with this a lot. And I think there's another fair criticism of to say that, at times he does seem like it's a political quietism. It's just like, here's how to sort of survive in this. And maybe there's not any possibility of any kind of making the whole better. You know, I'm kind of okay with that because I think that might be kind of where we're at least in the near term. And I think if he can sort of bring some more decency and uh, relief
Yeah,
in
yeah.
bad situation, I don't think that's so bad. But I do think there is more of a political upshot than it might first seem. But in our book, for better or worse, we end up arguing that he's kind of a non-Marxist critical theorist. He definitely is indebted to the tradition of critical theory, the critique of instrumental rationality, the critique of forms of alienation. But he seems to be working with even less of kind of a Marxist underlying framework than, say, Adorno and Horkheimer or even Benjamin. I don't know. Others would
Yeah, I mean,
disagree with that.
you know him and those guys better than I do, so I won't. Yeah, I won't argue. I recognize the flavor and the direction that he's coming from, but yeah, I mean, he seems to be his own weird person.
Yeah, I think that's just true. I think he's very idiosyncratic. Um,
Yeah.
that's something I like about him.
Maybe you can help me reframe how I think about this because I am often in the habit of thinking broadly of people as being in one camp or another, and often they will assign themselves that label, and it's certainly in some circles it's fashionable to label yourself a Marxist. Something that I have always found a little bit frustrating about people calling themselves Marxists or Freudians or even Nietzscheans is that it feels like you're living your whole life under the umbrella of another person in a way that seems like, well, you don't extend beyond that radius at all. But I confess I also feel a little bit of reflexively this sense when I hear people define their thought as Christian. It's part of what I really like in actually am not. I realized I was going to release it this week. I have not yet released it. Cameron and I talk about some of the poems in the new issue of Literary Matters, and one of the poems we talk about is by Maya Venters, and some of the things one of the things I really like about her poems and some of the better Christian poetry or art is that it doesn't feel defined by that as a foregone conclusion. And I think something that I like Christian poetry that is really fully defined as Christian poetry, or Christian thinking that is really fully defined as Christian thinking, to me, there always feels like there's something sort of sad and inert because well, no matter where the thought goes, we know where it's going to end up. And to me, that feels not ultimately so different from Marxist thinking or God, angels and ministers of grace defend us from Marxist art. Yeah, I mean, and granted, Christians would say, well, Jesus is not just a man, but like, Marxism is not just about Marx. I don't know. Does that? Part of that I know is like a personal prejudice on some level, but it's a problem I have with like my very, very smart Catholic friends often is that I just know, no matter what, like if I bring up certain kinds of problems with them, I know what they're going to say because I don't know everything they're going to say, but I know where they're going to end up. And that feels to me, I don't know, a little dispiriting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in a way fair enough, right? I think I would want to try to draw a distinction between. Oh boy, I feel like there's so much on the table right now. So
Yeah,
sorry
yeah, yeah, yeah.
for
No,
sort of
no, no.
taking a moment.
Well, this is like the whole, like, as I've learned, like
Yeah,
podcasting is the art of digression. So we don't
yeah.
have to go anywhere.
Well, let me sort of follow up on the Christian art
Please, yeah,
for a
yeah.
moment. And I think that Han, he seems to have returned more to his Catholicism in recent works after a long kind of detour where he seems more interested in Buddhism. And I don't think it necessarily means he's left all of what he drew from Buddhism behind, but I think that's kind of interesting. He's been a pretty secretive guy. He hasn't given a lot of interviews, but that's sort of changed over the last 5 or 6 years, and he's written more autobiographically in his books. And it seems like the death of his father sort of played a part in this, perhaps in this kind of reconsideration of Christianity. But I would say there's a difference between thinking about Christianity as a set of answers and thinking about Christianity as kind of a lens through which you view the world, right? And that word that gets thrown around a lot in Catholic art circles, but I think is a useful one, is that idea of a sacramental vision, right? And what
Right.
what I would see that as is sort of thinking that there's an infinite depth and mystery in things, including like an infinite, or not an infinite per se, but a vastly deeper than human depth to evil in things as well. So there could be a tension between that sacramental vision and a very, very tidy sense of, well, here are all the answers to life's problems that I got, strictly out of the catechism, right? Or the feel the need that you need to provide some sort of moral solace or apologetic twist in your artwork. I mean, I think those are all ways that you
Yeah.
can kind of falsify art. And I think Flannery O'Connor, right? I mean, I think she feels this tension. I think she got a lot of pressure on her from friends and family to write, you know, the kinds of
Mhm.
stories she really didn't want to write. But she did have a
Yeah.
deeply sort of sacramental vision. She had this vision that's shaped by a sense of the fall. I think that the kind of Catholicism that I'm drawn to, and I like to say sometimes that I think I'm a serious bad Catholic in
Sure.
some ways.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And but I think what I'm kind of drawn to is that vision of a mysterious world, a mysterious God that, the church orients us towards us in certain ways. And I'm not going to say that everything's just apophatic the whole way down, but I think it just makes no sense to think that we have our head around God or our head around the world
Yeah.
given our limits, right? So I think that one of the things religion should do is create this sense of depth and mystery and a certain humility before things. Um, but I think a religious vision too gives you a sense that things are significant, that things have stakes. And I think those things, those sides of things, I think can be useful for art. But I
Yeah.
do think that art that's explicitly thinking of itself as Christian can sometimes go astray with a moralism, with a tidy set of answers, a unwillingness to dwell in the difficulties. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly as the intellectual dunking era of new atheism, passed, and they've fallen very much out of fashion among, at least among, mainline liberals and progressives. There is a version of, it's what I often find annoying about self-described agnostics. It feels to me like there's a real sort of like internal bait and switch happening where I can say like, well, who knows? And so I'm not on the hook for anything that religion prescribes, but also I can sort of say who knows, and in a time of crisis, prayers up, and I'm not really on the hook for a Camusian absurd either. That I get to kind of have my cake and eat it too in a way that feels to me like hard atheists and overt religious people have in common, recognizing that it's a big fucking deal.
Yeah. I think that's important. Well, I think there's a version of, maybe agnosticism is the right word, but sort of serious seeking and wrestling that falls in that serious camp.
Yes. But most agnostic, I think that's the thing, is like most agnosticism feels to me not to be in motion. And if you're an honest to God agnostic, it feels like it's hard just to like chill on that one.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think about Dante and the lukewarm in hell, right? I mean, it's like, these are big questions. And I find that I have much more in common with someone that wrestles seriously with them, whether they are someone that comes to a religious conclusion or not, than in someone that is either doesn't see the significance of the questions or is very uncomfortable with raising them because it might unsettle their views, right? Because there's some sort of spiritual stagnancy in that, right? And I don't think that's the same as at all like the little old lady that's truly pious and is probably like a crazy mystic that is certain in her faith, right? Because she prays all the time. Right. But I think there is a certain kind of Christian that's became pretty common, I think, when we were growing up, that actually really isn't that serious in the practice of their faith, but is certain that they have all the answers and that everything is squared up. And I don't think that that's terribly helpful. I read this great Smithsonian magazine. I might have sent it to you, texted to you, Smithsonian magazine article about Cormac McCarthy. And
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, and no worries. But there's a line in there where it said, and I don't know whether this was coming from it might have been coming from his brother. It might not have, because his brother gets quoted in the story a couple times. But it said that Cormac McCarthy believed in God on one day and didn't on the next day. And I thought that that's, maybe not a great way to live. But boy, I think that comes out in his literature, his works of literature really well. Sure. He grasps the seriousness of the question.
Maybe that's the thing I have found frustrating about art that too firmly resolves those kind of questions in like a story, for instance, is that it defies experience. Like whatever your beliefs about the universe, your depiction of the world and stories should have some relationship to your experience of it. And I think it's most often religious stories that I think in kind of overt ways betray our sense that like, well, I don't know. There's like, we don't tend to get answers. We don't tend to get solutions. We don't tend to see justice perfectly performed. But I think secular visions can do that as well. Speaking of which, I did think that there is a thing he is talking about, which is seeking something outside of the self, seeking something that is the other, seeking something which almost by definition is not possessed, is not exactly possessable. And there is even like, what it reminded me of was there's an experience I remember having in like, I was a sexual late bloomer in some respects, and there was a period before I was having sex with people, but when I was old enough to sort of have not like when I totally caught fire and was an insane person, as an adolescent boy, which happens to adolescent boys, in a way that like, I'm not sure if women are entirely aware of. But like, there was a weird period of like having longing and having crushes and knowing I wanted to be close, but having no idea what that would mean. And certainly not having an idea of what I wanted to do. but there was just a sort of like a craving for, and the closest thing I've felt to it since is the craving I felt for my daughters once they were born. If I'd spend time away from them, just like I just want to be. It's the joke that like women often, but parents will do with babies is like, I want to eat you up, and it is something like that. It's like I just want to bring you close and be close to you, and I almost can't account for what it is. What I thought of reading this was that I don't think he's really talking about Eros is the problem. I think he calls it Eros, and Eros is a better word for it than a lot of other words. I think he's talking about something, he's a little bit of a Hallmark romantic, that he a little bit believes in capital T, capital L, true love in a way that I think is doesn't correspond very much to reality. But what it feels like the closest thing to what he's talking about is the Aristophanic vision of Eros. Not even the Platonic one. Like in some respects, he's very moralizing about Eros. Like it's a very moralistic vision of Eros. But what he seems to believe is that you're seeking, it's not just like, if it were the Diotima vision, if it were Socrates' vision, you would be seeking the other in pursuit of the good beyond. And that doesn't seem to be what he's after. He seems to like, the focus really is on the otherness of the other. And that to me is like Aristophanes' vision of the other half, that you can never be reunited with, but that's what your longing is for.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because he definitely brings up the symposium.
He brings up the symposium, yeah.
And he brings up the Diotima Socrates story at the end.
Which I still find to be like a morally repugnant vision of love, the Diotima vision. But that's me. I'm not, I know it's.
I think it depends on how, I mean, that's one of the things that's so great about Plato is because it's a literary work in addition to philosophical work, there's always so many different ways you can take it. I think that there's.
Yeah, I wouldn't say of the Symposium. The Symposium as a whole is a fascinating book. The vision, the argument expressed by Socrates about what love is, I find pretty nauseating. I just find it to be like genuinely objectifying and genuinely neglecting the other person as a person.
Yeah, and I think that you could read it that way, but I mean, I think that there's this whole tradition that comes out of the Symposium and out of that story that would read it, I think, a little would read it differently. And I would read it, how I find it most persuasive is reading it almost kind of phenomenologically, right? So when you first fall in love with someone, even in the stage that it might be more infatuation, but isn't kind of a desperate infatuation, isn't a worry that they're going to reject you, hasn't sort of like narrowed down to them alone. There's this sense that the whole world is kind of illuminated, right? That suddenly the colors are brighter and the smells are brighter, and you're sort of more attuned to what's going on. So I think that there's this notion that one way you can read sort of what's going on there with Eros is, and this is a part of what I think Han's interested in and where he is more close to the Socrates version, is this idea that Eros can open you up, can draw you out of yourself so that you're not sort of just stuck in mirror world or in your self-enclosure or your thoughts. Suddenly you've been sort of wounded and opened back up, and you're more in the world again. You're more open to the world. And that's going to be focalized around the beloved or the object of Eros, but it's also going to sort of reach beyond it. And there's going to be this sense of yearning that doesn't just need to treat the other as a rung on the ladder to sort of climb up to the vision of the good or to God or whatever, though you can certainly kind of, read it that way.
I think he calls it a staircase, literally.
A staircase, right? But I think you can also see it as, okay, there's something about this kind of Eros that reaches beyond the objects of the beloved and sort of reattunes you to the world. And there's sort of like a metaphysical impetus or drive or urge of ultimacy that it can stir.
I don't know if that's true of Eros. I think that's true of some things, but again, I don't think that's Eros. I mean, to me, Eros is like it's like, what are the examples that come to mind when I think of like Eros as Eros? And it's like Apollo and Daphne,
sure,
Pasiphae and the bull, and Mira and her father, right? Like monstrosity, horror, like sickness, humiliation, like you are struck down and he quotes Badiou. He cites Badiou's wonderful, horrible. He cites Badiou as, and I'm sure it's in French. It's, I guess, better, but the line is, Eros is a two scene, TWO SCENE, which things I think like, is that quotable? Two scene? A two? That's a terrible phrase. But he says Eros is a two scene, that, and I think that's really not quite the case though. Like the experience of Eros is horribly solitary. Like if it, like truly in the moment of like being in the thrall of Eros, you're sick,
Yeah.
you're lost, you're very much alone, and it's not like Eros is not really requited love. It's a force. And to me, like this was, I guess, like it would. I wonder if I would read the book in a slightly different, at a slightly different angle. If I wonder if I would read his understanding of Eros in a slightly different way if he had not started with Melancholia, because I think it started at his wrongest, and he
Yeah.
got marginally less wrong from there. But he, like, this passage made my head explode. Depression is a narcissistic malady. It derives from overwrought, pathologically distorted self-reverence. The narcissistic depressive subject has exhausted itself and worn itself down. Without a world to inhabit, it has been abandoned by the other. Eros and depression are opposites. Eros pulls the subject out of itself toward the other. And my thought when I read that was like, Eros and depression are opposites. Like, what it reminded me of was like when like homophobes would say like to a lesbian, like, all you need is a real man to straighten you out. You're like, I don't think that's what Eros and like, I don't think Eros cures depression. I don't think the problem with depression is that people like, I think there is a lot of narcissism and there's a lot of depression. And I think depression also draws one into oneself. But like, I've been very in the thralls of in the throes of Eros and very depressed at the same time. And they don't feel, it feels like depression is one, depression is like gravity, and Eros is like a powerful storm. And like sometimes they coincide, sometimes they move in opposite directions. They're different, like powerful forces. Like to me, he's very right to criticize the kind of the. I mean, I think he's like brutal on the point of like dating websites and like the contemporary consumerist approach to like dating and Eros. And I think that's he's exactly right in all the ways that's like simplifies and cheapens and strips down Eros, to less than itself. But I think he's doing the same thing in a different direction. He's turning it into a moral direction, and it's a force of nature. It's not good or evil. It's just a powerful thing that can totally fuck up your life, or it can happen in just the right way at the right time. But it's not a state of being to achieve and hang on to. It's something, it's like a fever. I don't know. It just felt like he's not being fair to his subject.
I think Eros is one of these things that is a difficult term, right? And one of the things that it's difficult about it, I think that you bring out so well, is the actual experience of Eros
Right.
is itself a difficult, sort of chaotic thing, at least in its intensity. And
It's pain you don't want to be over.
yeah.
Right?
And certainly in Platonic, in the dialogue, in like the symposium, Eros is a madness, but already in Plato, there is kind of this division. You think about like the Phaedrus. There's like kind of the manipulative, self-interested Eros, but then there's the Eros that takes you higher and that sort of wills the good of the other, sort of launches the chariot of the soul. I think that there's something true about that, right? I mean, I think that love can sort of transform us in good ways on that sort of journey, but love can also go disastrously wrong in all kinds of ways that aren't just a simple matter of you are too exploitative of the beloved, right? There's like a real risk involved.
Yeah.
So I think that that's fair. I mean, I think that in parts of the book, he's drawing more on this kind of Platonic, Neoplatonic Christian vision of an Eros that does sort of carry you higher towards the higher things, and an ennobling Eros. And, I subscribe to that I do subscribe to that. But I also absolutely agree with you that like the actual realities of Eros, when it comes to romantic Eros, are very messy. Right? Now, like Plato will say that Eros isn't just stirred by the beloved, right? It's not just a matter of desiring another human. There's an Eros that's stirred by beauty too, right? And that could be the beauty of art or the beauty of nature and things like that, right? That's the kind of eros that, okay, this beauty sort of stops me short, but then it sort of seeds this desire to respond to it, right? And that's one of that in the Platonic account, that's one of the impetuses for art, right? Like you see this striking thing and it calls forth an artistic response, right? It seeds this desire that's partly under your control and partly not.
Yeah.
That to me, I mean, we could probably argue that. I think that that's not the only thing that drives art, but I think there's
Right.
something to that. But I think that that's a lot less fraught than we turn to the relationship between eros with a sexual element towards another human being and how
Yeah.
that relates to this kind of moral ascent. I think one of the best works of art that I've seen that sort of grapples with this, and this might make you lose all respect for me
No,
because
no, 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 no.
these films were not very well received.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
But Terrence Malick, I'm not a huge, everyone likes Tree of Life, and I'm not a huge Tree of Life fan, but I
Sure.
really like the films Song to Song and Knight of Cups.
Yeah,
And
I've seen them. I've seen them.
yeah,
I got something out of them. I felt a little bit bewildered, but I didn't. Yeah, I didn't sniff at them.
yeah, I really like those films, and I realize that they have problems artistically.
Sure, sure,
But
yeah.
in Knight of Cups, early on, there's actually a quotation that gets read from the Phaedrus. And I think that's kind of the skeleton key or a skeleton key to reading that whole series of films, which also includes To the Wonder, which I don't like as much.
I
But
haven't seen that. Yeah.
it's sort of this sense that Eros is this power that can uh enliven but is just fraught with risk and puts you at the risk of being betrayed, being used. But there is
Yeah.
also this potential that opening yourself up to another person is going to, give what's most meaningful and sort of transformative, and
Yeah.
has like a redemptive side to it, orients you to something transcendent. And what I like about it in the films is it's really messy, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
really messy journey, and it's not just simply a matter. There's clearly a bad option. The Michael Fassbender character is truly just exploitative and aggressive, and he's just out for his own gratification. But the journey there seems to me pretty realistic in the riskiness of passionate eros. Uh,
Yeah.
while still
Yeah.
holding on to a more believable vision of how that can also lead to meaning, ennoblement, transformation in this more positive kind of Socratic sense.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there is something in. I mean, I certainly recognize it in in a certain kind of artistic production and response that I can fall in love with a work of art in a way that I think bears a real parallel relationship to eros, sexual eros, and similarly I can feel inspired and driven to write in a way that seems related to that. I think part of the trouble is that it's twofold. It's one, it's like he does seem to think these things lead in a good direction, and I think they just lead in the direction they lead in. And two, he seems to treat it like eros is magnetism, whereas for me it's more like surfing. It's really powerful, and it's potentially very dangerous, but also can be really glorious and can move you very, very quickly in a particular direction if you master it and if you master yourself. But then also it's over. And the part of what I get when I hear certain kinds of like moralistic accounts of eroticism is that it feels to me like, let's keep surfing this wave all the way to justice. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
it's not it's not going to justice, and B, it's done. It's gone. You can go surf another wave, but that's a different question. And similarly, like I can think of many times, like perhaps daily, that I feel like really compelled to make or to engage with a work of art, and that feels to have value to me. Like it feels like it has value to me, but also it's not necessarily an absolute or a moral value, and like it might involve my neglecting other things that are meaningful, and it might not be a
Yeah.
good decision, and it's going to be over. Like it's time sensitive. It's a gust of wind, and then it ends, and that's the same also with eros, which is why like I mean I just think like you're kidding yourself if you don't reckon with the reality that Eros is passing when it comes to a long-term monogamous relationship, which is not to say that it doesn't, there aren't recurrences, there aren't nuances, but like, it's not like the wind is going to always blow in one direction. And you're also kidding yourself if you don't acknowledge that, like, when you happen to fall in love with your neighbor's wife, or you happen to fall in love with your secretary, like, that is also Eros. And it can be a really powerful Eros. And there's a great line in, I was reading a Rebecca Lee story where she talked about her partner, her law, she's a lawyer, and he falls in love with a paralegal. And he said, her line about him is, she was so beautiful that I could imagine that he really believed that he was participating in something true and penetrating and meaningful, but I could see that he had just let life have its way with him. And to me, like, that's Eros. That's a true experience of Eros, and it can be the beginning of something wonderful that then you have to do other things with in order to make into something real, or it can be a gust of wind that blows you off your ship and you drown. So it just seems like it's like the Nosferatu thing. Like, a truer, more respectful account of Eros allows it to be finally unaccountable, finally mysterious, and finally kind of beyond. It's like, I feel like it's like the almost like a slight inversion of that line about Aslan. Like the beaver says, well, he's not safe, but he's good. And I feel like there's a certain like line of Christian thinking that says, like, it's unsafe, it must be good. So I keep throwing stuff at you. You can just you can run with whatever or change the subject. Yeah.
No, I just I just want to make sure I don't sort of speak too soon and end up saying something I don't actually think,
Okay,
which is always the danger.
Oh, sure.
I think some of it does come with sort of like pinning down the term, and also one thing that with Han, I think can be frustrating, but I think has some use, is, Han does like to dualize things, right? A lot. Yeah. We already talked about how he dualizes disciplinary society and achievement society. Yeah. And there's problems with that.
Yeah.
And I think that he dualizes this higher Eros in his account from a more gratifying seeking desire, right?
Yeah.
He makes that distinction. So for him, not all desire would qualify as Eros. There's kind of this baser desire and this higher Eros. And again, I think that's that can be pretty tricky when you're trying to think about what the experience is often like and how those things can be intertwined. But often I think he uses these hard distinctions to try to draw some light that's something you would miss otherwise. So I think I think that's clear with the idea of the achievement society, right? I think by sort of saying, oh yeah, forget about discipline for a second and focus on this.
Yeah.
That's a pretty bad account of how society actually is, but it's pretty good for getting you to see this thing he wants you to see and you may be blind to.
For sure.
So for him,
it illuminates a crisis. It's like putting the phosphorescent stuff in the blood,
Yeah, and he's such a different writer than Nietzsche. But I mean, Nietzsche's another philosopher, I think, that does this very well, right? It's argument by a certain type of hyperbole or overstatement or sharp contrast, right?
That's a Marxist slogan. Heighten the contrasts, right?
Yeah.
Heighten the contradictions, they say.
And it can be frustrating, for someone that I think, and I think I'm more like this. Yeah. I'm someone that's like, oh, but what about the messiness of life, right?
Yeah.
With the Eros thing, I think what really matters in the sort of the broad scheme of his thought, and whether he's brings this through in this book or not, or whether it's betrays too much about experience, I mean, fair enough, you can judge. But I think I think that one of the things he's trying to draw out is this idea of, okay, there is a type of desire that really truly only cares about its own gratification.
Yeah.
You already talked about sort of shitbag manosphere people that their whole shtick is getting guys to think about women like this, and it's disgusting, right?
Rankings and ratings,
things like that, right? And there are plenty of people that aren't self-conscious about it, and that's just what they do. And it might not be even in romantic relationships; it might be in professional relationships. You're a poetry editor. Most poets that I interact with are wonderful people, but you've definitely interacted with poets that care about nothing other than, will you publish my own poem? Right? Like,
for sure.
Will you give the gratification that I'm seeking from you? And there might be sad stories of how someone reaches that situation. But there's also,
Yeah.
I think there is kind of a default egotism of humans, right? Part of it's because Simone Weil makes this point really well, and it does really feel like we're the center of our own worlds a lot of the time because we are our first person perspective on the world. The world does seem to rotate around us because of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
how we're situated.
For sure.
Um, and then life knocks us on our ass and we realize that's not true. But there's a real danger that we take that bias and perspective or that situatedness of a perspective and just run with it. And then other people don't seem ever as fully real to us. The world, becomes sort of just about that ego drama of
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and I think he's interested in a kind of eros that pulls you out of that and you're like, whoa, here's something that's truly other and has an existence other than me.
Yeah.
And I have an attraction to it, but it's not the same attraction that I have to this porn image on the computer
Right. Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
to, the gratification I'm trying to get by just fishing for a compliment with this person, right? There is
Mm.
something truly attractive about this person. And I
Yeah.
do want to draw close to them, but I don't want to dispel the mystery fully either. Because to dispel the mystery fully would be to sort of let it slip through your fingers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But that's also
and
that's also what I sometimes find frustrating about some like modesty cultures, which is not to say like immodesty cultures are good, but like the Gary Steingart vision of a deeply immodest culture is horrifying. But like sometimes like the fear I have with modesty cultures is they have too little respect for the mystery because they think
yeah,
it is dispellable.
yes, I
Right,
think
and
that's
you're like,
right.
oh, you've seen her ankles. The mystery's you've seen her naked. The mystery's over. There's no mystery to her. Nope, you got the milk for free, so there's no mystery. Like, well, no, you can't get to the bottom of it. And that seems like if there's a really like a lot of good pieces of criticism that I really value are the ones that give me a new kind of question to ask, give me a new kind of direction to look in. And it seems like maybe a central question to this book is like, is it possible to long for something that you can't define? And
Yeah,
is it worth longing for something you can't define? And what do we experience what happens when we experience that? And what happens when we don't try to perform calculus and do a differential equation to fill in the definition to figure out what like maybe it's okay to embrace that undefinable longing.
yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, I think he's really interested in that undefinable longing, or that only partially definable longing, right? And
Yeah.
I think he would agree with you, even though he sometimes is a little cagey on these things. It's hard to square how he talks sometimes, like through in his Buddhist writings about, well, there's no there for us, right? But
Right.
then how's the other infinitely deep, right?
Right.
That's kind of something I haven't been able to quite figure out with him.
Yeah.
But I think he would agree that the other is infinitely deep, whether we recognize that or not. But I think that what he's calling eros to him is that drive towards the other in their singularity, in this sense that there's something ungraspable about them. And I want to draw close to them and know them better. And I want to have a relationship with them. But I don't want to just sort of make them a tool, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
sort of, part of what's integral to this desire is respect their separateness and respect what makes them sort of unique. That goes back to something you said earlier that I was really appreciated and didn't get a chance to pick up on. It's like I think that sometimes for all the kind of horniness of being young, there
Yeah.
is also often a kind of purity to those first
Yeah.
crushes
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's not just that you just want any girl. It's like
No. No.
this
No.
this person is remarkable in who she is, right? Yeah, I think that's part of what he's getting at on the sort of the romantic side of things.
And yeah, and there's it's one of the many steps in the progression of like really recognizing the boundaries between yourself and the rest of the world, right? If like object
Yeah.
permanence is maybe one of the first steps in that process, and like the existential slap of truly deeply physically understanding that you're going to die
Yeah.
is one of the later steps, then another early-ish step is that like, oh my God, I long for this person who is not me and who is not, I can't get at somehow, even if I'm near her. I can't like, there's this otherness to her that is irreducible.
Yeah. I think that's That's right. I think that's what he's trying to get at. And to him, I think that's what he is calling eros. Now, I think that's highlighting something important, right? And that is a type of desire. And I think that he would even say that that partly answers your concern. That's like, well, the actual physical, attraction or whatever might sort of come and go, or the intensity of this might come and go, because eros for him would also extend to things like, okay, conversations with this person, not just assuming I know what they're going to say,
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, yeah,
thinking
yeah.
that there's going to be like this continued surprise, this continued resistance. That's another really key thing for him that doesn't come through in this book, but I was excited to talk to you about because it's central to his aesthetics. It's this idea that really what we need in life is more sort of like resistance from out there that slows us down, that challenges us, not necessarily just in the way of like, okay, you need someone to come up and like, sock you in the gut and fight them or something. Not that kind of resistance, but this idea that, okay, this isn't just instant gratification. This is something that breaks me out of that cycle and slows me down, and I have to think about and linger with, and it's going to unfold slowly over time and only ever partially. For him, that's one of the great things about good art, right? Is like good art should resist. It should have, for him, the bad word in aesthetics is smooth, right? He's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
and he likes to pick on Jeff Koons, which the balloon dogs, which I think is hilarious, right? It's like his example. This is all that's bad about art for
Yeah,
Han,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah.
totally smooth. There's no resistance. You just look at it, and your response is just like, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
really nice," right?
I'm with him on Jeff Koons.
Yeah, me
I'm with him.
too.
Yeah, I'm with. I mean, an old like definitely hard Marxist podcast I used to listen to. The one that introduced me to Thomas Ligotti actually initially, called Struggle Sessions in self mocking vein. But their comment, which I thought was wonderful, was that they divided all science fiction into two science, especially like movies and TV shows, into two categories, into glossy and matte.
Yeah,
And they said glossy is bad, matte is good. They're like Star Wars is glossy, Star Trek is matte. It's not cool, it's nerdy, but it's got some humanity to it. It's got some dimension to it, and I think that there's a similar. I mean, I want to follow him down that path, but he opens with such a crazy example of art criticism, but
yeah,
so insanely wrongheaded. His whole account of this movie, what made me think of was the Sontag line about we don't need a hermeneutics of art, we need an erotics of art, and
yeah,
and like that's exactly what he's not doing. Her point seemed to be that we should stop like looking at art, trying to find the interpretation, and then deriving what we feel about it. We feel something, and then we have to come up with ways to talk about what is happening when we feel that. In his account of like the music, of the paintings, it's all like this passage of this music comes from this opera, and that opera is about love. But like if you listen to that music, it's fucking terrifying.
yeah,
It's this like doom laden sequence that he plays over and over and over again, where he shows the paintings, and he has this insane line. He says, because he includes some of this painting by this guy Carl Friedrich Hill, and he says clearly Lars von Trier knew that Carl Friedrich Hill suffered from psychosis and depression. Maybe, but his psychosis and depression isn't in the movie. The painting is in the movie.
yeah,
Like he wants to treat them as having equative values rather than producing an effect on the viewer. And that just seems
yeah.
I mean, his account of the erotics, like it's, oh my God, the problem is like, I started making, like, I looked at my notes, like 2/3 of them were like everything he says about melancholia. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I want to see more that he has to say on art that I could engage with in a different way, because in that he just seemed like the worst kind of interpreter. Like he seemed like he was he'd fallen into the scholarly vortex of interpretation.
I think that's absolutely fair, and I think that's a problem that crops up in his other books too. He has a reading of Bartleby the Scrivener in the breakout book, The Burnout Society. I think is a pretty crappy
Yeah,
reading
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah.
I think he's one of these. Well, he has some interesting readings on Kafka. I might send you like a 3-page
Yeah,
chunk about a
yeah, yeah,
Kafka
yeah.
story that I
Yeah,
thought was
please
kind
do.
of cool. Yeah, I think he's better at talking about art in general than he is about particular works of art.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and
A
and
little bit like, I mean, Heidegger kind of is like talks about art, and cites Heidegger, but like Heidegger talks about art the way like early 19th century doctors would talk about the human body. It was like, well, that's a fascinating idea of how something could be, but isn't.
Yeah, and Heidegger is definitely his biggest influence, for sure. That comes through less in this book, but 100%, that is his biggest influence. Yeah, and one of my, not saying that I've probably been guilty of it from time to time, but I think one of the things I constantly tell students and I constantly get frustrated with in literary criticism is like the cookie cutter approach where you take the theory and then you just stamp it on the artwork, and there's no actually attentiveness to the nuances of the artwork. There's no back and forth allowing the artwork to push back on the ideas. So keep that all in mind as I say this, because I'm not advocating using Hahn as like a cookie cutter, but I think he gives you some cool ideas to think about with art. But I think he doesn't really show how you can use those in a nuanced dialectical way a lot of the times when he talks about actual artworks.
His use of the Flying Dutchman, I thought, was quite good. He talks about the Flying Dutchman, the ship of the dead, sailing eternally through the seas. He says, the Dutchman, flying like an arrow without aim, without rest, without peace, is like today's exhausted and depressive achievement subject, whose freedom amounts to being condemned to perpetual self-exploitation. Capitalist production is aimless too. It no longer has any concern for the good life. It's the maximization of profit, which again, it's a powerful engine, but you can't let that be your compass. You can't let that tell you where you're going.
Yeah, that's right. And the where you're going, I mean, he does say this, and he states it pretty clearly in this book. But sometimes I think that probably my co-authors and I, when we write about Hahn, I think this is what we think, and we may overestimate it. But I think that part of the big problem with the Achievement Society, it's not, going to the gym per se, or trying to write good poetry. It's not like you should just kind of, I don't know, totally check out and be.
What was the Timothy Leary? David Gosselin had a fascinating but kind of bonkers a documentary where he talked about Timothy Leary, but he did convert me on thinking Timothy Leary was a piece of shit because he had the two, what is it, turn on, tune in, drop out, as a Harvard professor. Like, no, that's a horrible that's a horrible
that's not good.
Piece of advice. No, I'm with you there. You don't want to just check out. Jesus Christ.
I think the problem with the Achievement Society is you never know when you've reached some space of flourishing, and you don't know how to do anything but just go for that next, often low-hanging fruit dopamine hit of achievement, right?
He said there's no conclusion. There's no
conclusion,
arrival.
Right?
You're not aiming to get to anything.
And, he talks some about friendships too. And I think a lot of this stuff, romantic love is just so fraught and it's so important. But there's a reason why so many great novels and poems are about it, because it is so fraught, right? Friendship can be fraught too. But often with friendship, it's a lot easier to see how a good, healthy friendship has kind of grown you over time and directed you toward the good. And sort of it's how it's been an enriching part of life. But I like when he says that friendship is an end in itself, right? You're not like a true friendship. It's not like, well, I'm like just, I'm hanging out with so-and-so until I can upgrade to Timmy over there or something like that, right? That's a ludicrous way to look at it. And if you're looking at it that way, it's not a friendship at all, right? It is that using the other just as a stepping stone. It's something that actually can kind of give shape to life because, okay, here's one thing where I don't have to think about how this fits into a long-term plan. I'm going to be friends with this person. It's going to unfold.
That was the first half of my conversation with Steve. Go check out his book, An Introduction to Byung-Chul Han, with Ethan Stoneman and Robert Wiley. Go also check out New Verse Review. And I included a link in the show notes as well to Steve's great short essay, Red Dragonflies, which is also about Han. You can hear the second half on The Secret Show at sleerickets.substack.com. Put in your email address and I will give you a week's access for free. After that, it's pretty fucking cheap. You can also, if you have a little extra income and would like to support the show further, you can sign up to become a Motherfucker of the Arts, a founding member. It is a little more money every week, and it makes a big difference. If you would love to hear The Secret Show, but you have financial difficulties, just send me a note at sleerickets@gmail.com, and I will hook you up. Again, I think the Catholics are really going to love the second half of this conversation. The Catholics and my dad, who's sort of I think my dad would call himself a serious bad Catholic. I think he would like that one. And a lot of the rest of you might as well. It is We get into some thorny atheism, religion, meaning, the universe kind of stuff, and it's really a pleasure to talk about that stuff with Steve. He is almost baffling, as you now know, he's almost bafflingly without airs or pretensions. I don't understand how he has succeeded as an academic, except that he's the nicest guy in the world. All right, go check out New Verse Review and his book on Byung-Chul Han. Go check out the second half of our conversation at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. And look forward, or look with dread, to next week's episode Alice produced, all about T.S. Eliot and demons. Thank you all for listening. With any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.